Hello. I think I know a fair few, but in case you don't know me, I'm Ben, obviously PHP developer, and a lot of JavaScript. A relevant thing to say before I start, I think it affects my viewpoint and what I think of Copilot, how it's useful to me. I'm a freelancer. I mostly work by myself, so there's not a big team. Big team for me is two. So kind of bear that in mind when you're deciding what to take from what I've got to say. So Copilot, before we start, who's heard of Copilot, already knows what it is? Who's used it? Not so many. Okay. Who likes it? Both people that have used it. That's good. It doesn't surprise me. So you've heard of it. What is it? Well, that's a good place to start. So this is what GitHub say. That's the product page. Your AI pair programmer. It uses OpenAI, which is I think is a Microsoft thing. Microsoft own GitHub. Is that right? Yeah. It suggests stuff to you, and here's me getting Copilot to write a function to tell us what it thinks it is. So new AI tool that helps developers write code faster. That kind of shows you how it manifests as well. If you're used to, so I use PHP Storm and other JetBrains stuff, and I also use VS Code. There's a plugin available for both of those. This is VS Code. It's like IntelliSense. If you're used to IntelliSense, it suggests stuff as you type. It kind of, when I first installed it, it was a bit weird. It clashed with the PHP Storm built-in ones a little bit. It took a bit of getting used to, but I can't actually remember if I changed settings, whether I just kind of got to grips with how it worked. But general rule is, like you'll see in a minute, it comes up grey. A grey one is Copilot, and then the ones in a little drop-down menu in PHP Storm are it. It does its thing where it knows what your code is and suggests stuff. We could click the link and there's demos there, but there's some more GIFs. So I was going to do a live demo like this brave chap here, but I was practicing a live demo. It will play, it takes a while. And I was thinking, no, I think AI needs adding to the list of things never to work with, like, what is it, animals and children. So I didn't. But this is showing some of the things it can do. So you see there, it's just, should I go back to this? No, we'll get bored if it loads too many times. It's filled in, whilst I've been talking, I've typed the first one and it's started filling them in, planets. I don't think I gave it the chance, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't think Pluto's a planet, which maybe is how physics is these days. Has it changed? It isn't, yeah. But it's, here again, it's spotted my pattern. I'm giving them all a window of 10 each one, and it's like it's learned. And this is one of the things, you kind of get used to what things as you use it that it will and won't do. You'll see in a minute, it's, this is not particularly exciting, it's taking some input from somewhere, but it is gonna start suggesting kind of what I want to do with this. So I'm going to decide, the variable name is obviously going to get looked at, I think. I should say as well, this is based on a real world thing that it was for a client project. Didn't feel like I'd literally put the exact context in, so I've invented this planets and distances thing, but it is actually a thing it did for me in real life as I was actually writing code. So you'll see there was a much better option that I rejected, and then I got this one where it's duplicated all the numbers, but it did have like a nice 4-line one, was the first one it suggested where it actually used the properties. But yeah, it learns your context and starts to auto-suggest and fill things in, and it also then starts to understand your code and guess at what you might want to do. So variable names and what you're doing, and I guess whatever else is on GitHub. Here's one where it didn't do so well. But the interesting thing with these is the more I've used it, so I'm gonna ask it when I finish typing to load a list of my repositories off GitHub. And it has a fair stab at it, but the code doesn't work. It needs authentication, and it makes no attempt to do the authentication. So it fails, it gets an error off GitHub. Messing around with this later, I prompted it to use Guzzle, and it makes a good stab at properly initializing a Guzzle object and doing stuff with it. It still didn't do the OAuth, but then when I went into the method and kind of prompted it to add OAuth on, or you can just start typing, it kind of auto-completes. It's very good at that kind of, like, Guzzle's a well-used thing. It's obviously got loads of code on GitHub, which is what they've trained it on, using it. So it does a fair stab at populating that stuff. So because it's Go Night, I thought there should be some loose theme, and it's kind of nice that he did a Hello World example. So I knew how to do Hello World in PHP with a little bit of a flourish. You have to pass it a letter for it to work. It thinks now as well that I want to do it again in PHP. Like, no, I started in PHP, so it's not that great. It doesn't know everything. But yeah, this is just its write and go. So it's clearly understood enough about the code that it can do that too.
Driving that cursor, obviously.
Yeah, so what's happening here is, like, I've obviously written that before I started recording, and I've written this comment, and the grey that pops up is it prompting, and I then press tab to accept the completion on every line. Sometimes it offers you multiple lines, and sometimes it offers it line by line. I'm never quite sure. Like, a load of that, I think, whilst I was looking that way, just came in at once, didn't it? But this bit came in line by line, so it does that. But yeah, so I mean, this is really cool. Like, I recently did some contribute to an open source project that ended up needing some C. I know no C. It's got pointers and stuff in, like, Go. And I was, what's all this? And I was able to, like, kind of write in array, for example, and then say, like, make this in C. And it was getting you, like, close enough that instead of, like, floundering around thinking, what do I Google? I don't even know what the term for what I want to do is. You're able to have some code that had, like, it was, like, close enough that you had things in there to Google and hook on. You were just way more productive really quick. It was a really interesting, in fact, that open source project was the whole reason I installed it in the first place. Another developer on that was, like, raving about it. Thought I'd give it a go. There's another JavaScript developer trying to write C. So yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I just pressed tab, return, tab, return, tab, return, and it's translated that into Go. I think it will definitely have an impact, whether this particular one does or something else in future. It's definitely, like, and it's a really trivial example, right? It's it does fall over, but oh, and then I ran it to show you with an A and a D. They're not A's and D's because I have small children and we're not allowed to call them A's and D's. It's an A and a D. There are some issues. There are some questions. So this is the big one. These guys are, like, and this link looks like that. I thought there'd be no internet. So basically open source people who are, like, I think it's a class action lawsuit this guy is kind of pulling together. I think he's a lawyer and developer, or someone in there is a lawyer. There we go. He's a programmer and a lawyer and a writer too. He's getting open source contributors together and trying to contest with GitHub over whether they are allowed within the terms of MIT GPL licenses and stuff to train their AI on their open source contributions, whether it's a breach of license. Like, should they be obligated to publish some, I don't, I'm not a lawyer clearly, but should they be obligated to publish some kind of, like, distillation of the learnings as open source too, or something like that, I think is one of the arguments. And then the flip side of it as well is, if you use Copilot, is there a question mark over your ownership of your own code? Like, has the AI written that code and is therefore entitled, or GitHub as an entity entitled to a share of the IP? Or if indeed this side of it's true, are all the open source projects actually contributing to your closed source proprietary license for your client project? It's a big question. I'm sure it's going to, I think it's, it's bigger than just the whole can AI create IP is a wider question that society, I think, has to address that will probably, oh, I'm stood in front. You can see a shrug emoji, I've moved. Yeah, that's a wider thing that society has to think about, to address, and I guess it will pan out in the fullness of time. I mean, I'm using it daily. I think it's really cool, but as I said before, I'm just me. I kind of make all the decisions, and hopefully this doesn't come to bite me. Yeah, I know it's. I mean, the guy, some of the guys I working this open source thing with, one of them got really into researching this and was like spent like evenings going through GitHub. He was getting it to suggest things to him, and was then trying to hunt down through open source code to see if he could find the suggestion anywhere. He never could. There's a blog post somewhere. I tried really hard to find it, but I can't find it anywhere, from one of the staff. I think it's like on Medium or something, but it's a guy who works on Copilot, and he's saying the thing is explicitly programmed never to drop in code. And, you know, as itself, it doesn't store any code. It just takes, like, I guess the equivalent of like sentiment analysis or something like that. It's like the understanding from it, the learnings from it, and then it's kind of a multifaceted thing that can then apply those and push them out as code in certain languages. I shared as well, actually, I meant to say at the start, PHP isn't one of the, JavaScript is, but PHP isn't one of their languages they say it's like really good at. So presumably PHP is only going to get better, but it's pretty useful already. They have a developer preview as well called the Copilot Labs, so at that link, that shows some new stuff they are working on. So there's 3 things in that at the moment. This is only available in VS Code, and if I'm honest, the reason it crashes loads. It makes my VS Code keep dying, so I generally have it turned off. But I did this and got a screenshot. So I started with this, really basic function. It wrote that. That's one of the things it can do. So that's code to comments, and it's not just a generic. It's clearly a step by step. Like I can see that. Like I didn't really need a comment generator for my code, if you see what I mean. But I can see that that's detailed enough. I could give that to a client if I need to communicate to a client, like exactly why something's happening a certain way, so that perhaps they can, like, I don't know if this happens to everyone. I sometimes get scenarios where it's not my decision how it works, or it's not, it's not doing what a client wants, but I need them to understand enough in English. Sorry, I have to explain to them in English, that they can then tell me which bit of it needs changing, which bit of it's wrong. So I can see it being a value for that. I mean, the question is always, would you trust it? You're clearly going to proofread it and whatever, but it can translate, that's the other thing. So clearly they have that already, because you can do what I did before, but they're putting a proper, like, you select code and press a button in the plugin that's going to translate. So that's this in Go, which it did for me. And then I think this is the most interesting one, is the test generation. I don't actually know, like I didn't run this, but it looks valid, as in, whether or not it's quite perfect, it's clearly understood the kind of what that method's doing and the flow through it. And because the plugin doesn't work very well, because it crashes, this was only got it to actually return a test a handful of times. But the like demos they've got and things, it clearly is it's like good. It seems to be good at making code like a test. It's actually like exercising all of the method. It's kind of understanding the flow, and like all the code paths are going to get followed, stuff like that. Different permutations of arguments. It's not just, maybe that's the wrong thing to say, because I don't think a simplistic way to generate tests right would just be do permutations of arguments and hope stuff goes wrong, and then maybe make the developer say which ones are correct and not right, or whatever. But you're some of the way there. Whereas this actually seems to have enough of an understanding of the code in most cases that it's getting you further than just kind of generating permutations that you then got to do something with. So I think that's got a lot of kind of just lets you write tests, the boring ones you don't really want to write. It can just help you put those in, and one day they will, they'll catch bugs, but they won't if they're not there, clearly. So concluding my thoughts on it, it really speeds up boilerplate. So I haven't shown this, but say I'm working on a Laravel project. It clearly has all the artisan commands to generate stuff, which you'd use, but if you, like I don't use them necessarily, you can just make a new file in the command folder, and then as soon as you click in, it's kind of putting the default function in, just as if you'd made it with the generator, which you could use a generator, so that's not adding loads. But if you start clicking in and trying to like do the default stuff, add the methods that you may or may not want that the generator doesn't do. It can kind of autocomplete all those too. So it's going beyond where that is. I found it really useful for that. Again, eloquent models, if you want to set casts up or something like that, you kind of start typing like UPD for updated at, and it then just like knows you want to cast it to a date time or a carbon if you're using carbon. It's really good at solved problems. So things that developers solved in the 70s that we don't really need to be retyping. So like if you ask it what a prime number is, it will just churn you that function out in like, you just, write function is prime and it will fill the rest in, and it's good. And again, I can't remember the example for this. One of the early things it did to me that impressed me is it filled in something of this category, and then it spotted and kind of corrected for a couple of edge cases that I was like, I wouldn't have done that. That would have been a bug, and I'd have added that in a month's time. So I thought that was kind of cool. Good at repeating patterns. We saw that with the planets thing. I work on a project that has 3 product types. It's a sort of in school space, so you've got a parent, a pupil, and a staff type, and there's different rules for the 3 of them. It has a grasp of the 3 things. So if you write something to send an email to a user, you'll get so far in, and then you start trying to, towards the end or somewhere there'll be a bit that's going to do slightly different stuff per user type. It immediately knows that you've got 3 user types, and it kind of starts filling stuff in, and it then even not just like makes you empty methods, one for each of them, say, it then kind of has an opinion, at least makes an attempt to guess what you might do differently for them. It's kind of hard to explain, but I encourage you to install it and try it on your own projects. It definitely sort of learns and knows what it's up to. So that's kind of interesting, kind of cool to see, even if you don't find it super useful. I say it's good for learning new languages. It's also great if you're learning to use new libraries. So if you never used Guzzle and want to start using Guzzle, it just knows how Guzzle works. You don't have to keep going to the manual. It just kind of jumps you like over loads of hurdles that you'd otherwise be like stopping for and going to look something up. Same with APIs. Say you want to talk to Stripe. There's loads of code talking to Stripe on GitHub. So it knows what Stripe looks like and will make you good, useful suggestions. This one I find really cool. The completions are often, even on easy stuff, they're just not what I would do. Because I work on my own, I find it really nice having that like shake up, that cause to question what I'm doing. Like, is there another way? And then you can kind of have a think about it and like, is the other way better? Or do I like my way? Am I ignoring it? But it's kind of nice to be challenged. That's what, one of the things you miss working on your own. So their tagline of it being your AI pair programmer isn't completely off the mark, I don't think. So lastly, this is in many ways its biggest impact. If you're trying to think how to explain it, if you're trying to write a new feature, you kind of, you maybe need to sit and spend half an hour like throwing together a load of methods, a couple of new classes, whatever. You're just kind of all in your head. You know what you're going to do. You're going to make this, you're going to talk to that, this is going to be over here, and then you suddenly get stuck with one of those solved problems, for example, that it's good at filling out. It really just need to write some boilerplate to talk to an API and authenticate it. Something like that. It like really helps you keep focused and like, for me at least, to kind of, not get distracted. Because what I'm really bad at is if I go away and start writing some specific piece of code, I'll then forget about the fact that I had all this stuff in my head and I thought it all through. I knew exactly what I was going to do. It's going to be done in an hour. And at the end of the afternoon, I still haven't quite finished it because I've got distracted by all these other little bits I have to do to make it work. And then it gets left till tomorrow. And suddenly it ends up taking longer than you feel it really needs to. So it helps that not happen a lot, which has been, arguably for me, its greatest impact. So I think that's the last bullet point. Just any questions, or you can watch its animations. So this one's a horrendous fail. It's like decided to, it knows I'm in a folder called PHP Southwest, so it's started it's invented an API that's going to tell it if a postcode is okay or not. And then on the right, I was trying to see if it could have a more detailed opinion about itself, but no. But yeah, any
Is it any good at writing rockstar programs?
Sorry?
Is it any good at writing rockstar programs?
I don't know.
Have you heard of that one?
I don't have internet, or we could look.
So, when you do pen programming, I often find having two minds looking at something can help pick up bugs and
Yes.
security mistakes. If you're doing this on a daily basis and you start getting a little bit lazy and relaxed, is it likely that you might introduce a bug or a security hole
Yes,
from it?
definitely.
And then who's at fault then?
I think, I mean, well, yeah, and personally, I don't trust, I probably should have said this, I don't really trust anything it puts in. I'm using it as a suggestion, and I'm looking through and making sure it looks right. No, it's a fair point. Given time, laziness, whatever, just, you're in a rush that day, you're going to skim through it fast, and you should. Yeah, it's a very valid point. But I guess the flip side to that is, are they things that you wouldn't have done yourself in the same situation? So if I'm in a rush, and I don't review its stuff, is that any worse than me being in a rush and not being as diligent on my own stuff? But it's a great point.
Or if you just copy a big function back over flow.
Yep.
Yes, oh, definitely. Same problems. I'm always curious about developers and mistakes that are made.
It might put it in, but the developer might not have thought about it, and it puts it in. So that.
I think I can honestly say at the moment I feel it's had a more positive, even if it does introduce some bugs, it's had a more positive impact on my work than, like, I know it spots things I'm going to do or have forgotten to do.
We will make mistakes.
I think it's not actually quite good enough at the moment, because you have to you can't really trust it.
No.
So you have to read everything, and I think actually it'll be even worse in a couple of years' time when it is right 98% of the time, and then you just go, oh yeah, I'll just take it. Whereas now you're like, that's good.
Well, once it gets to 98% of the time, will they employ you?
But someone's still needs to press down.
We'll all just be experts in containerization and making this stuff run. No one will need to do anything else.
On the same line, can it refactor if requested in short circuit?
So can it
Can
refactor?
it refactor if requested, if you see it's not as you want it, or it doesn't, you're not able to integrate in what you already have? And can you ask him to refactor what he did?
Yeah, you can. So you can't really ask it to refactor. It does have a keyboard command to say, like, next suggestion, next suggestion, next suggestion. So sometimes those are handy. And it learns, in fact, if you keep next suggestioning a certain type of thing, it will swaps the order around and starts to give you that first. So yeah, it does. It also, after last PHP Southwest, I never knew about match. I don't know if I'm the only one. Where he had that if statement to assign a variable, but you can just do variable equals match, and then the condition's a bit like a switch statement. It can refactor a load of ifs into a switch, a match, which I thought was cool. You just write a comment that says, do the above with a match, and then press return.
Yeah, it'd be really cool if you use the same technology but take code that was already written and improve it.
Yeah.
But I guess you can't do that.
They can. They added brushes, which are like in other AI, you've got like a prompt, you give a text prompt and it generates something. They've got a bunch of pre-made prompts, so you can like highlight some code and say refactor this or add comments to this.
I don't have anything open.
And it just completed the test. So I'm interested just to see, because you were talking about what, test pilot?
Yeah, they're calling it test pilot. It sort of does it. It doesn't do it. I mean, some of the things that are in their labs thing that I was saying about on that slide are sorted there already. You just have to, it can be a bit. So the thing where you type comments to trigger stuff, you're a bit at its mercy, and you end up wording it and it does something wrong, and you end up deleting it and rewording it. You kind of get good at knowing what's going to trigger it to go down a certain path. And then you think, well, this would have just been easier to write. I didn't need to spend 5 minutes working out how to make Copilot do it. But
Is it using other code in your project?
It's very good at that.
It's not just all
No. It gets, the reason you can tell it's good is because when you first start using it on a project, is rubbish at it. And then after a week, you suddenly notice, I don't know if it's analysing all your code or it's just the cumulative effect of all the files you've had open. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it definitely seems to build a picture. It also seems to be relatively good at understanding context and not offering suggestions from one project to a different project, which is kind of important, I think.
I think they released a blog post like last week where they actually said how it works, and they do learn from the files you've opened. They like store them locally, so it has context from your project for the new code it generates.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But you pay for this?
Yes, it is you can get a free trial, and I think it's $9.99 a month.
Free if you contribute to open source.
Yes, I haven't bothered to see whether I qualify. I've assumed I don't, but perhaps I do.
Can it match languages? PHP, HTML, or
I don't know. I haven't tried to do that. It can. It can do blade templating, which is kind of along there. It's okay at that. It understands the kind of, which I guess is kind of a yes. I don't even know if it's aware of, like it clearly is aware of language, because you ask if it to do something in Go, it does it in Go. But sometimes I'm not super sure whether it's just AIing kind of the fact that you're in a certain language and it's a consequence of a good AI engine rather than a actual, this is a language. If you, like I started writing code in, some of these demos are in files without file names, and it offers suggestions from the wrong language sometimes, and then gradually zones in on the right language.
Does it perform limited validation on what it suggests to stop it suggesting something that's complete garbage that is found somewhere?
Well, it doesn't suggest invalid syntax in my experience. It does trip up with, it doesn't seem to have a good grasp of what's in different versions of PHP. It will suggest syntax for, like, if you're using an older version of PHP, it will suggest new features that obviously don't work. But I don't think it's as kind of clear as it doesn't understand. I think it's an consequence of it being AI. It slowly learns and gets better, and probably if you keep deleting its suggestions, it's probably noticing that and it's gonna get better. I don't know. I tried asking it to see if I could get it to any funny things, but so I don't think it has.